fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are listening to Architecture Talk through this summer of heat and coronavirus. We are drawing to a close our conversations on the relationship between architecture and COVID-19. And today I am talking to a Singapore-based architect, Anjali Mangalgiri. Anjali grew up in India and she started out her practice in Goa, India, and now has located in Singapore. I picked up a conversation with her, asking her what it was to practice in these strange times, and then equally importantly, what it was to practice as a woman in Singapore and in India, with all the trials and tribulations that go with that quest. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Here it is. First of all, welcome to Architecture Talk.
Thank you.
So you are an architect, you're practicing out of Singapore and you're practicing out of Goa, and you grew up in India, I presume?
I did.
Yeah. And then you went to school, then grad school at MIT and other fantastic upper Northeast American schools.
Yes.
And you chose to come back and establish a practice in Goa and in Singapore.
So Singapore happened after. I started with the Goa practice in 2010.
Yeah. Okay. So now you're based out of Singapore. How is it in Singapore with coronavirus? How has your life been impacted by it?
So Singapore is actually, I think, one of the safest places that we can be during this crisis. There are a lot of restrictions, but Singapore as a society, I think, is used to sort of complying with restrictions, and hence, we've done really well. We are actually kind of on the tail end of the second phase of coronavirus here. The second wave of coronavirus here. So the first wave sort of happened in February because we saw a lot of a spike in cases due to the travel from Chinese New Year.
Right.
Singapore, again, like at that time, did really well with their contact tracing and, just being very effective at testing. And they were able to bring down the cases to pretty much zero in March. So we did not really have any kind of shutdown or lockdown until April. And the reason why the cases spiked again, so the reason why we had the second wave were twofold. One was because Singapore basically asked all of its citizens and PRs to return. So we had a spike in the imported cases, and the second spike was obviously in the dormitories where we house, or Singapore houses, majority of their construction workers, migrant construction workers in Singapore. So that was also the time when we, as a world, we're not really sure about, how to really look for people with COVID. So, at that time at the airports, what they were doing was primarily temperature checking and checking for symptoms. But, at that time, we didn't know that a lot of people could potentially be asymptomatic, right? So then people who didn't have symptoms or didn't have temperature were allowed to go back to their homes or wherever, back to the society. And even though they did have a 14-day stay at home, it was kind of self-regulated. And so that's where the spread happened. And then the second one, which is, I guess, the kind of the big elephant in the room for Singapore, is the spread that happened in the dormitories. So we in Singapore have about 300,000 migrant construction workers, and They majority of them live in these purpose-built dormitories, where they're housed, and because of high density and close contact within these dormitories, once the infection reached there, it kind of spread really fast. Also, when they go to work on construction sites, it's not necessary that people from one dorm go to one construction site. So there are, workers from multiple dorms that may end up in the same work site. So therefore, again, the spread happens from one dormitory to multiple dormitories.
Your personal life has not really been affected by this, I take it. You're just continuing more or less normally, and your practice is working normally, or has your practice been impacted?
Yeah, so I mean, interestingly, I actually gave birth to my second daughter in January.
Oh, congratulations.
So thank you. So I am a new mom, and my first daughter was born in 2016. And, it was the first time around, I didn't know what to expect. So I didn't really slow down, and I kind of really burnt myself out. So this time around, when I knew that Ela, my daughter, was going to be born, I actually sort of downsized my firm a little bit towards the end of last year. And and also I purposely said no to any new project, to starting any new project. So in a way, this stay at home is happening at a good time for me. It forced me to kind of stay home with my daughter, spend time with her, enjoy motherhood, which I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Of course, we had both the kids at home. We were working from home, so it was challenging. But we're really the privileged ones. So I think that if we begin to complain, that just sounds, or not sounds, but it is very wrong. So really, I have nothing to complain, but only gratitude.
So do you anticipate any difficulties sort of starting back your practice up after your daughter grows up a little bit? I mean, a lot of women complain that, having to take time out for childbirth and child rearing severely impacts their practice. So are you concerned about that? What are you doing about it, particularly as compounded by coronavirus?
But it is the truth, Vikram. It is. I mean, I feel that, I read it somewhere that women are supposed to raise kids as if they don't work, and women are supposed to work as if they don't have kids, right? Like, we don't really get any allowances for the fact that we have, or, we choose to produce children. So even though we are, responsible for the sort of continued existence of the human race, we're not given a break at all in this world. So we are still competing with men who, don't have these limitations, and we are still responsible for raising our kids in the best way possible and giving them the best, childhood that they can have. So
what's your strategy to sort of combat that?
So yeah, I mean, I think the first time around, I was very much misinformed, and I think I was really following sort of the trajectory that the world expects from you, right? Like, you read CEOs, women CEOs of firms. I remember particularly the Yahoo CEO, and she basically was going to have, give birth, and she was like, I'm going to take 6 weeks off, and then I'm back to work 100%, right? And I think that those are the expectations that are set for women, is that if you are driven, if you're ambitious, if you want to, continue to make a difference, you need to kind of do this on the side, right? Do the motherhood on the side.
Yeah.
But so the first time, that's what I thought I would do. I would kind of swing it somehow. And it really impacted me because my work actually kind of ramped up right after my daughter was born. I got these 2 really big clients and 2 really big projects. And I really, at that time, really wanted to prove myself. And I did not take any time off after she was born. And it was very difficult. It was difficult. I didn't let it impact my work, and I didn't let it impact my daughter's early years, but it impacted me personally and my wellness. So this time around, I was like, you know what, I need to make my own choices. And therefore, I did what I did, where I downsized my firm a little bit, and I refused to take on any new project. And it has been a kind of a boon in a way, because I don't have so many overheads right now during this period when we pretty much have zero revenue. And if there is no way for us to actually generate revenue, even if we work super hard, so it's actually worked out for me really well.
How do you run a practice out of Singapore with work in Goa?
So I started my work in Goa in 2010. I was living in the US at the time. I was living in New York. And after the 2008 financial crisis, when, I was prior to that working for a developer in New York City. And we were working on large scale public-private partnership projects. And those were pretty much kind of at a standstill during the financial crisis, and therefore a lot of us were let go. So at that time, it was sort of an opportunity for me to think about what I would really want to do if I had the resources. And I have always sort of, amongst all of us, right, like had all of us Indians who live abroad, had an opinion on how India was developing and how things could be done in a better way, more informed manner. So I used it as an opportunity to kind of look for business opportunities in India. So 2009, I did a long visit to India, visiting many cities and places to see what I could do. And my idea was to develop this kind of architect-developer model, where we develop projects as an architect would. So it would be built with very high standards of design and sustainability, but they would be sold. So, it still had to be commercially viable. And that kind of model comes from the fact that as a consultant for the longest time, a lot of my ideas and my team's ideas would not get implemented because of reasons of cost, budgeting, policy, XYZ. So I thought that, is it possible for me to try this, where I actually do something as an architect where everything's super responsible and we are doing what we think is the right way to build buildings, but also be able to find buyers for it and not make a loss necessarily.
Did it work?
So that's, it continues to work, actually. It is challenging. And, I feel like scaling up would be really challenging for me, because I've realized after 10 years of doing this that I am a pretty bad entrepreneur. What drives me is what drives an architect. Like design, sustainability, all these things drive me. Like numbers don't drive me. At the end of the day, I'm like, you know what, let's just take a loss and like still do this in the building because it's good for the building, right? So I think I'm a really bad decision maker, even though this is what I wanted to do. But yeah, no, so it's very interesting because we have been successful. So we've done 4 projects in Goa until now. And when I say projects, each of them are individual single family homes. Yeah, so we have been able to sell them all. We don't really have to market our projects. We get buyers through word of mouth, because what we're doing is fairly unique. And I think that I've not had to negotiate the quality of design, construction, or sustainability in any of my projects.
So where did you grow up? How did you get into architecture? What was the sort of reason for that?
Journey. I grew up in Delhi. I studied architecture at School of Planning and Architecture.
Yeah, I know that's on your CV, but why did you get into architecture?
Why did I get into architecture? So there is an anecdotal story, and it's very interesting because I wrote this story in my statement of purpose when I applied to MIT. My mom, we lived in sort of a South Delhi neighborhood, a middle-class family. So we didn't really have access to public parks at that time while growing up. So my mom would actually take us to construction sites in the neighborhood where, they have the mountains of construction sand.
Yeah.
And she would leave us on that mountain and just like stand beside us and let us play. So that would be our sand pit. And she believed that, if you play with your hands, then that spurs your creativity. And, I was obviously very, very small at that time, but it's such an important memory in my mind. And I feel like maybe that's where my love for architecture started. I really didn't know what was architecture. But I definitely knew that I would end up in a creative field.
So
And
construction sand,
yes,
plain
construction
construction
sand,
sand.
but you know, Badarpur sand, the coarse construction sand. That's where my
Yeah.
mom would leave us. And my brother and I would make tunnels, you know, like we would put our hands from
Like
different
kids do
sides
in
and then
beaches, in New Jersey beaches. Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, we were not fortunate to have so many, you know, public parks and spaces. So
So
my mom
what prompted your
improvised.
mom to come up with this idea? What's her background?
I have never asked her, but I should.
Yes.
I
That's
guess
a stroke of
she's,
genius. I mean, to allow construction sand to be used as a sand pit, that's just brilliant.
I don't know, you know, helicopter parents would not agree. It is quite abrasive.
Yes, it is totally abrasive. It's totally un-Indian mom-like. So that's why I'm asking, where did she come up with that from?
Yeah, I don't know. I should ask her. I should really ask her. But yeah,
Okay.
so I think that's where the beginnings are. And then I'm very fortunate that I did end up in architecture. I did really well in my architecture entrance exam to my own surprise. And once I was in the field, then I knew that I was home because, you know, it was just everything was very stimulating for me. And I just loved every part of it.
What was SPA like? Did you enjoy SPA?
Absolutely. I still believe that those 5 years were like some of my best years in terms of the life that I've lived. And you're smiling because you know what I mean.
I spent 5 years in Chandigarh College of Architecture. I just goofed off, man. I just
Yeah,
relaxed.
but that's what makes you creative, the goofing off.
Addas and
Really.
chais and samosas and bread pakoras and
Right.
it
Yeah.
is
And
true. I mean, there is sort of like my experience was that we've effectively had no faculty, and we effectively didn't really have any kind of a structure. So we learned to just get on our own. Quite unlike the culture we run here in the United States, where I teach, where
yeah,
everything is figured out and programmed and made to order. So is that what you're talking about? Best time of your life?
that was the best time. I think it's a cultural shift. I think it's like, you know, we, all of us architects, like we have a certain way of thinking. So it's more than just, you know, the design that we do or, you know, the buildings that we eventually build, or in your case, for example, the papers that you write and the research that you do, right? I think it's the way of thinking. And those 5 years are meant to kind of switch your brain in a way, right? So wire your brain to work in a different manner. Like I remember these golden nuggets from professors, you know, where one professor had told me that architecture is nothing else but problem solving, right? If you're walking the same path to come to college every day, and you're crossing like a, you know, like a puddle of water every day, then you as an architect are responsible for fixing it, to coming up with a solution so you don't have to walk through that every day, right? So architecture is more than just building buildings. So those 5 years were really about, I think, changing the way our brain works.
Was it a shock to come back to India after grad school in the United States and practicing for a bit and all that?
Yes,
What was the
yes.
shock? What was the biggest shock?
I was in the US for a very long time. As you had said in the intro, I went to grad school twice and
Yeah.
I practiced in New York for a while. So I think, I mean, I loved my grad school experience too. I think I'm just really interested, like education and being in an educational institution really drives me. So I loved being in, you know, American universities. Again, you know, some of my fondest memories and times are that. And I think that in the West, somehow you are coddled a lot more. You are
So you love
treasured.
that. Yeah.
Of course, I love that.
Yeah.
And
In
then
your
suddenly it's like, you know, in India, you're suddenly like thrown in, like, you know, thrown to the sharks again, right? And honestly speaking, especially as a woman, where I did not have a male partner, where in business, and I did not have a strong kind of family backing or any kind of a strong male support as a woman trying to go out there doing something on her own. I think it was not something that people expect, and it was very challenging. And I've had no challenges on my construction site. Like, that's the other thing. Like, I go to my
You had
sites and
no
I'm,
challenges on construction site?
as a woman,
Why not?
like, particularly because I'm a woman, I have never faced any particular
That's
challenge
unusual.
because of that.
Why not?
It's true. I love it. I mean, I go to sites. I worked on this house, in the last few years, which is in between Bombay and Pune. So it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. And I would be sometimes the only woman amongst like 50 men, and it would be just fine. It's like, it's not as if, I had problems in establishing my credibility or my position or anything. Really, in 10 years, I have never faced any kind of bias on my construction sites because I'm a woman. The big
But you
bias has
faced
come.
challenges in the sort of more client
So,
level?
not really client level too. It's more like society, people you meet, and
You mean friends and
also
family?
your friends and family, of course, but also just socially, the people you meet. I think there's a lot of hierarchy in Indian society. There's a lot of patriarchy, and there's definitely like age bias. There are lots of biases in Indian society.
So give me an example.
Okay, give you an example. I don't know if you've heard this, but
No,
I
from
mean, I'm
your
sure
life experience.
when people meet you, I've had experiences where people meet you, and if they meet you through someone, then they're very accepting to you as a person. But then if they meet you without, that common person, then they really actually take a moment to figure out which bucket they need to put you in. And that is the Indian society for you. I mean, I think we're digressing anyways in terms of talking about people. That's my least favorite topic.
All right, let's talk about practice. Grounded India, grounded. Why did you pick that metaphor? Is that got to do with the construction side?
So grounded is because my practice, as I call it, is very much connected to nature. And that was the reason also why I chose Goa as a place to practice, because, I just obviously
Besides the
love the
sands and the
landscape.
beaches.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really get to build very close to the beach. So, but yes, you do get to build on beautiful sites, right? Like beautiful greenfield sites, and, with some lovely old trees and adjoining rice fields and these gorgeous village landscapes. So my point was that in a place like Goa, where development is increasing, the amount of construction is increasing, right? There is a responsible way that we must build. So that was the reason why, I mean, I wanted to find a place like that in India, and Goa sort of made sense because of a lot of reasons, but that was one of the reasons. So the kind of architecture that I practice is very site responsive. So we build with the site, with the site's topography. We use the natural features of the site as a starting point for our design. And we always try to leave the site better than what it was. So we don't want our construction to have a negative impact on the land. And usually these are greenfield sites that we're starting with. So that, I think, is where the name grounded comes from. I also use sustainability a lot as one of our driving factors, but often this word is misused. But really it's about respect for the land. It's about respect for the nature and the natural resources.
Mm-hmm. What was the architectural community like in Goa? I mean, did you have a good support, good intellectual group, a good creative group in Goa, or what about the schools of architecture? Is there a culture there?
There is. I think they're like any other place. There are groups of people who, mix together. I did get involved very much with the Heritage Society there. And we used to conduct heritage walks in Panjim in the Portuguese Quarter. And, that is where I sort of found my community in Goa. And again, it was because I personally feel a lot of respect for heritage, history, culture, nature, all of these things. So that's where I invested my time.
Well, a very strong kind of a modern regionalist sensibility to work. It reminds me of Jeffrey Bawa. Do you know his work? And
Absolutely.
have you been
Yes.
down to Sri Lanka to see his work?
I have not. I have not. I think it's one of those things that I feel that, oh my God, if I visit Sri Lanka, I need to do so much research and I need to have ample time.
Hmm.
And, that has been my roadblock to actually just go to Sri Lanka.
It's an
So
amazing
yes,
place.
but Baba is a huge, huge influence on what we do.
Oh, wonderful. Any other influences?
I think many. There are several people who've done so many wonderful things. In India, Charles Correa, of course, has been a great influence. He also has practiced in Goa. He has a home in Goa. He has set up a foundation, in Goa. So Charles Correa, also for his response to regionalism, as we're saying, has been a huge influence. Then Kerry Hill, I am very fond of his work. Kerry Hill is a Singapore-based, actually he's no more, passed away last year, I think, but he's been a huge influence. He's sort of the father of tropical modernism, as you would say. So his buildings are a lot more contemporary, but again, they do respond a lot to, their tropical location, weather, and the regional context.
Mm-hmm.
Japan is another big influence.
Did you go to Japan?
I have, yes. So I have visited Japan many times.
Kyoto or Tokyo?
Both. So I was fortunate to actually do a workshop in Kyoto at the Kyoto University of Art and Design. They have a workshop on Japanese gardens for 2 weeks, which is a residency workshop. And I did that in 2017. So that was a really great experience of just being in Tokyo for 2 weeks, living there and just walking around, exploring many, many gardens and the city.
Fantastic. So why did you move to Singapore?
My husband moved to Singapore, so it was more personal than work.
Yeah.
As I said, I moved to, or I did not completely move, but I started my India project in 2010 when we as a family were still living in New York. So Vikram, my husband's name is Vikram too. He was still in New York, and then he found a great opportunity in Singapore in 2012. So he moved down here, and then we basically, obviously, Singapore and India was a much easier kind of a plan rather than New York and India. So this
sure.
became our life, especially during this time, right? Like there's absolutely no travel.
Right, I know. What's the architectural community been like in Singapore?
So, Singapore is a small place, and there's not a whole lot of new construction. There are a lot, but I think Singapore architecture is so wonderful. I mean, we have some really wonderful buildings that incorporate a lot of nature. So I actually believe that globally, Singapore is kind of leading the movement of designing buildings that incorporate a lot of horticulture in a way. So there are, trees and like huge trees that are incorporated to create sort of a microclimate for the buildings to reduce their energy use, as well as provide spaces for recreation and spaces for biodiversity to thrive. So Singapore is doing really well in terms of, the green architecture per se. Singapore also, I think, is a very resilient place. So it is a place where, people, if they set their minds to something, they kind of just get it. They don't let a lot of obstacles stop them from getting there. Mm-hmm. So one of the really interesting things that the Singapore government has recently announced is a program called 30 by 30, where they are trying to, or they're going to aim to have 30% of the food that's consumed in Singapore being produced in Singapore. And Singapore, being a small place, is fairly land poor. So we can't do large-scale conventional farming. So a lot of that food production will actually happen within buildings. So rooftop gardens, and I'm hoping some of that would also, transform into some new innovative ideas for vertical farming.
I see. I see. Yeah, that sounds interesting. What about the schools of NUS, or have you any
Well,
link
yes. So
with?
NUS is there. I have not really, interacted much. I did have an employee who's now studying there. She's doing a program in sustainability at NUS. So I'm familiar with that program. And they do talk about the concept of circularity, where they're talking about taking the sort of rainwater that's harvested and using it for gardening in the building. So basically, like a circular waste management system within the building. So resources are not really wasted or sent to landfill sites, but reused within the site.
Mhm. What is your plan? Are you going to ramp your practice back up, or and do you plan to do more work in Singapore, Southeast Asia, or India, or where are you going?
Good question. I mean, you know what? Plans don't really hold a lot of weight when you're struck with a crisis like we're all in today. So
Right.
maybe like the lesson here is not to plan too much, right? But I would love to do so many things. My practice is not dormant, so we're still in practice. We have one project that's completing in Goa, and then we have another two on the drawing board, which we hope to start as soon as things are safe and we have, the availability of material on our sites. So work in Goa will continue, but I think also looking forward, now that I have two kids, I think that I may have to, look at Singapore, spending more time in Singapore as a base if I, plan to raise them mostly here. But I mean, you know what? Before the COVID crisis, like distances didn't seem like such a big deal. So those issues were not really issues to be considered when one was planning. But I think now that this crisis has happened, we are suddenly all thinking a lot more in terms of being rooted to where we are, right? So I think Singapore would be more of a base going forward, and I would really like to contribute to Singapore society and Singapore urbanism in a way. So like programs like this 30 by 30 really kind of get me excited. As I said, the integration of nature into buildings in Singapore really get me excited. So I would actually really like to contribute to those ideas here, because I also think that those are ideas for the future, for the whole world.
So as you move towards the end over here, I mean, you mentioned this the virus and the quarantining
Mm-hmm.
has certainly provoked me to sort of take stock of my life and be reflective and think about being more grounded and more sort of rooted. Your term is rooted. Uh, but have you is that been a have you been sort of has the virus produced a sort of a reflective sense in you or in your friends and family? I mean, you of course have a very newborn, so I know I have three kids, so I know it's when you have a newborn, it's like chaos. There's nothing else.
Right.
But still, has it provoked some reflection?
I think a lot of gratitude. So, we're seeing such terrible stories of misery around the world that I think that I wake up every day feeling a strong sense of gratitude as to where we are and how fortunate we are. So that's big. Also, I started my practice when I was 30. I turned 40 this year. So I think in your 30s, you're very impatient and you want to do everything really fast, really, like get there. You just want to get there really fast. So I think that what I've also gained now is a lot of patience. So I feel that, there is no real rush. And that's what the COVID crisis sort of also teaches us, right? Is that there is really no rush. We have a lot of time, and we should just try to take the right decisions at every step. And that's more important than, racing from one place to the other, or racing towards a certain definition of success.
That's a good note to end on. Anjali, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on Architecture Talk.
Thanks, Vikram. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is your producer, Amelia Jarvinen. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Spotify. We would also love to hear from you if you have any suggestions on new topics or guests. You can always reach out to us on our website, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks again, and until next time, this is Architecture Talk.